Hello and welcome. I'm Justin Warren for Gestalt IT, and joining me today, I have Andy Stone, who is CTO of the Americas for Pure Storage. Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Justin. It's great to be here with you.
Now, we're here to talk about security and particularly ransomware, which is top of mind for pretty much the entire planet at the moment. There's been a massive upsurge in it, and it's now even gotten presidential attention, which is a bit of an uptick in interest. Andy, what are you hearing from customers when you're talking to them about ransomware? How often is this coming up?
Oh man, it's coming up all the time, Justin. Literally every single day, multiple calls a day, we're having these conversations. And customers are just concerned about what they should be doing. How do they educate senior executives, especially their board, on the state of ransomware protection in their organizations? It's a question that seems that every board is asking. How prepared are we? Can we recover from such an attack? If so, how long is it going to take? And so we're trying to help customers prepare the answers to those questions.
Yeah, that is an area that a lot of technical teams do struggle with, that bridging that divide between, often IT sits off in the back office, it's a little bit off on its own world, trying to get across to talk to the senior business leaders and, as you mentioned, the board about issues that relate to technology. Historically, that hasn't gone that well. How's that going at the moment? Are people managing to do that better, or is that something that you're having to coach them through?
Yeah, I'd say there's still a fair amount of coaching. It's interesting because ransomware as a topic has gotten so much attention that folks are reading more and more about it. They're trying to gain an understanding, but there's really still a pretty definitively large gap in terms of knowledge and understanding. And so you're trying to help organizations understand where they really are today versus where they want to be and how to bridge those gaps. So many times what we see is that the message kind of gets obscured as you go from folks lower level in the organization up to senior management. It seems that the message gets eroded and a much glossier picture of reality is probably painted for those higher level folks than should be. So it's trying to inject some reality and help folks figure out how to communicate effectively to those higher level individuals in the organization, the real state of affairs and what needs to be done to address any gaps.
Right. So how can people figure out how to talk to the board there? What are some of the things that they should be focusing on when they have that conversation?
A lot of it comes down to simplicity, right? You can't show up and start talking a bunch of security or technical jargon and lingo because they're not going to understand, right? You're going to lose the audience very quickly. So we try to keep things very simple in terms of before, during, and after an attack. So just make things as simple as possible, contain the message to the simplest context so that the senior level folks can digest it in bite-sized pieces.
So let's talk about those sections that you've mentioned there. It seems like a pretty good framework for understanding things. Before, I think people aren't really across with what before looks like, or we wouldn't be in this mess. What are some of the things that you recommend that they consider as a before step?
Yeah, so before an attack, really it comes down to a few key things in my opinion. Number one is all about end user awareness training, right? So helping organizations understand that they need to train their users and not only do the training, but measure the training, measure the efficacy and the effectiveness of the training that they're providing so that they know what areas they need to go back and target for additional focus. The second is probably around hygiene. No IT shop likes to do hygiene, right? Nobody in IT is ever going to raise their hand and say, I want to be the hygiene person, right? It's just not fun. It's not sexy. It's not glamorous. So it's not where they want to focus, but it's absolutely critical and of importance, especially in a security program. So finding the right ways to track and measure effectiveness when it comes to hygiene in the organization is paramount. A third thing is all around credentials, credential vaulting, making sure that you have the right solutions in place to protect your administrative credentials, especially across the entirety of your environment. And then the last thing that I often get into where I see a lot of mistakes made is logging. What I generally will find is that a lot of organizations try to pick and choose what they're going to log. So instead of logging everything, they try to pick the 10 out of 100 most critical systems in their eyes. Well, when you do that, you give the attackers a 90% chance of not landing on a critical system. And remember, when a bad guy's coming into your environment, they don't know what your critical systems are. So you need to log anything and everything you possibly can, keep a big warm pool of data around so that you can analyze it and orchestrate outcomes to make your threat hunters more effective.
Yes, I often see that in statements after an attack where someone says, well, we have no indication that any data was taken. It's like, were you logging anything?
Yeah, yeah,
That
exactly.
you don't know. Yeah, so then at least you can give confidence about what you should be doing, which I suppose is what we should talk about next. You mentioned, so if you have an attack, what do you do when it's actively happening? I mean, that's something I think that people should probably plan for. It's not the sort of thing that you want to be making up on the fly while you're, I'm currently on fire. I should probably think about what I should do about that.
I would agree with you. I think, tabletop exercises are good, but you have to involve everybody in the organization and get the right inputs. When the attack's occurring, you have to try to contain it to the broadest extent possible. And that's a no-brainer, right? But, when you're in the middle of it, again, if you don't have the right policies and procedures in place so that someone knows, go turn this off, then this, making sure they understand exactly the process to follow, you are making it up in real time and you're likely going to miss things, and it's just going to be an absolute disaster. The other thing is you have to make sure that you have recoverability baked into your plan, making sure that you have an environment that gives you the ability to start recovery immediately after an attack is critical. So you have to have the right infrastructure in place, the right solutioning on top of that infrastructure in place, and the right processes around it to make sure you can get back up and running quickly.
Yeah, no, I would add practice as well, because just
Absolutely.
coming from a backup and recovery background, people don't need backups; they need recovery.
That's right.
And you go to try it and find out that you don't have the tapes, or the system hasn't been working very well, and the last possible time you want to find that out is when you really need it. I imagine that it would be the same for a lot of the other processes that you have, something that you've done on paper but haven't really sort of practiced at all. That's not going to be something that you're able to do very, very well when you're under attack.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, focus on your critical tier 0 type of infrastructure, Active Directory and DNS. If those get hit, you are completely lights out in your organization, and that's the last place anyone wants to be. So, putting an emphasis and focus on tiers of applications and defining the timelines to get back up and running for each is of absolute criticality.
And little things like, yes, AD's down, and that means that email is down, and now we can't tell anyone what's going on.
Yeah.
How do you talk to people when you don't have email? Yeah, things like
That's
that. Yeah.
exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, we were joking in a forum last week, actually. Fortunately, personal email will still work, so you can get your resume out.
Yeah, so resume generating event is
Yes,
probably what we're trying to avoid here.
absolutely.
So if you are unlucky enough to have this happen to you, and really we should be sort of thinking about it like when rather than if, because it's just so prevalent in the environment at the moment. It's not a fault of blame. There's a certain amount of like, well, okay, how prepared were you? But look, even the best prepared organization, if you're a nice juicy target, someone is going to come after you.
Yes.
So you need to be ready for, okay, this has happened to us. We've now responded to the incident, but now it's sort of the aftermath. What does that look like?
That's right. Yeah, and it's all about recoverability, as you said, right? So the only question that matters is how fast can you get back online.
Hmm.
Senior executives aren't going to call up and ask, oh, how good's our backup solution? Which one are we using? How many copies do we have? Where are they located? They don't care about that. All they care about is, are we back up and running yet? Is our business online to make money? And so making sure that you have the right layers and tiers of recoverability in the solution is absolutely, again, critical. You have to make sure that it's not just, one thing that you're relying on. You need multiple things in your backup plan, right? You need to have tiers defined for each of your application types. You need to work with your business to understand what they deem as critical and to make sure it's clearly articulated to them what to expect when an event occurs. Because the last thing you need is 10 different business owners coming yelling at you, like asking why their business isn't back up yet. So making sure that all the senior leaders understand what the priorities are going to be, what the order of operations will look like, and what they can expect in turn is absolutely critical. But fast is the most important thing. It's the only thing that matters when when the events occur.
Yeah, so speed feels like something that may have changed, because a lot of this sounds very familiar to those of us who were doing disaster recovery, 10, 20 years ago. But there, it does seem to, it feels different this time. It feels like there's a different aspect to things. Is speed one of those things that has changed in the last 10 to 20 years?
Well, I think speed has been there, but the change has been, it used to be speed of backup. Everybody was concerned about how fast their backup could occur. So how fast can you get my backup done? Now the speed that matters is coming back, the recovery, right? Everybody cares about how fast can you get my data back. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get written. I mean, it does to an extent, but getting it back is really what matters, because when your business is down, that's the most urgent thing.
And it does feel a bit like prior to 20 years ago, it was very expensive to run a full DR site with full replica of everything. It feels like it's a bit cheaper now, or it feels more accessible in that we can actually provide good protection to more than one system. We have things like cloud systems. We don't have to completely rebuy all of the production infrastructure in order to have a recovery environment, but we do rely on more things now as well. So it isn't just one mission critical system that we have to protect. Anything could get hit. And in fact, with ransomware, it could be the entire environment. So cherry picking one system as being that's the one we'll spend money on might end up being the wrong answer if you do get hit by this.
That's right. Absolutely. You've got to protect it all. And the other thing is you got to be careful, because some vendors will tell you they'll use buzzwords. They'll use things like air gap and other, technical terms to make you think you have certain levels of protection that you just may not, right? Bad guys are quite sophisticated these days. They have built multi-billion-dollar businesses off of ransomware alone. They are very good at what they do, and they will find ways to attack the infrastructure if they want. So, relying on one control, on an air gap, or on just the cloud or something else is not a recipe for success in my mind. I think you have to have clearly defined layers, again, of recoverability, different tiers, probably in different locations, but it needs to be a well thought out and worn strategy.
They are definitely very organized. We've seen reports of entire teams running Jira tickets and having quite sophisticated help desk systems. They provide better service and support than some banks that I've had to deal with. So yeah, they are very sophisticated, and if one of these really good crews does target you, you need to be playing your A game.
Absolutely.
So this has been fantastic. So thank you, Andy. If people are looking to learn more about this, where should they go, in your opinion?
Well, start with Pure, please. I mean, we'd love to talk to you about some of our solutions. We have some really great features in our products that give you an opportunity to recover from the onset of one of these attacks. So one of our features called Safe Mode, which is a fantastic option, and it's free in all of our arrays. You can also check out some of my blog posts. I have a number of them on the blog site at blog.purestorage.com/tag/cybersecurity. And there we cover a broad range of topics that are not Pure related. They're broadly about cybersecurity. So, start there. And then, second to that, look at your external sites. Look at Krebs on security and others to try to find the latest on industry events and continue the learning as best you can.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining me here today, talking to us about security. It all changes so fast. There's so much going on. I will definitely be checking out the blogs that you've shared with us to make sure that I understand as best as I can, and I encourage the audience to do the same. I've been Justin Warren for Gestalt IT. Thanks for joining us.